This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Benneroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And me, Peter Katz, formerly with NBC, ABC News, and stations from Boston to Los Angeles. White Plains Week, what's happening? Who are the newsmakers? What's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, Westchester, and the world, and all you taxpayers out there. Fasten your seatbelts and get out your wallets. This is John Bailey, and this is the City News Roundup show, White Plains Week, with the anchor for all seasons, Peter Katz, who is doing the show now. It will be 8th year next year.
Don't remind me.
That's right, exactly, right, well. And right now, it's time to go for the headlines. Jim Benneroff is on assignment this week. Here are the stories making news this week, December 1st, 2017. Westchester County Democratic legislators propose tax increase of 30% over time. Says they say that County Executive Astorino's budget has a $120 million to $150 million gap. Meanwhile, in another part of town, County Executive-elect George Latimer proposes that he will try to hold his first budget for 2019 to no tax increase if he can. Thank you, George. And now, Peter Katz will give you another edition of Trump the President on taxes. The Continuum Apartments opens for business at 55 Bank. Regional Planning Association suggests region prepare to upgrade mass transit facilities with 250,000 new housing units at the train stations over the next 20 years. That's going to be fun to do. Now, we'll have video of Scott Reckler, RXR chairman, on the potential of new downtowns. Meanwhile, Metro North, is it prepared for more commuters from White Plains? Planned 5,000 apartments in the next 5 years by eliminating parking lots. Who knows? The Comptroller of New York State declares 12% increase in pension costs will be requested of school districts and cities. Requested means you gotta do it. State approves judges' ability to cut pensions of lawyers convicted of wrongdoing, and the state also approves sale of protected lands to grow local towns. Now to the White Plains Week. Willow Newsreel March of Time. And first up is the McCallion Building, seat of county government, which is heading into its final month of the present administration. And what they did this week was the shocker of the week. They put out a press release proposing a 30% increase in property taxes over time, whatever that is. Well, an absolute shocker.
We have to define first who the they is. And in
yes.
this case, it's the Democratic caucus,
Absolutely.
the Democratic legislators.
Yes.
Now, since we
people who have your best interests at heart, so
well,
they say.
No, since we've just come through an election season
yes.
when it's been Republicans versus Democrats,
yes.
Some people will say that what we're seeing here is really nothing more than the Democrats continuing the campaign against the Republican Astorino administration. Others will suggest that perhaps there's merit to what the Democratic legislators are saying,
yes.
And that what they're doing now is setting the stage for an actual increase in our county taxes.
Right. Well, they claim there's this big gap caused by the airport and other things, and that they're almost not in compliance with the fund balance percentage, and they also are claiming that they want to restore. But what do they want to do?
Well, they're essentially saying that when Astorino prepared his budget, he made a colossal mistake and is off by $100 million.
Yes.
There's not going to be $100 million
because they want to approve a whole bunch of county contracts, right?
So
they have to negotiate it, though.
The way this usually works is that when you talk about budget gaps and stuff, the gap seems huge at first,
yes,
and then over time, as we get closer to Judgment Day, when they actually have to decide how much we're going to raise your taxes, all of a sudden they find money somewhere, or they discover that the gap is not as great as it was thought.
Maybe they will.
Or they figure, due to our superior management, we have managed to close the gap.
Yes, what they failed to mention in this press release is the fact that they voted for these budgets.
Well,
two Democrats actually did.
The legislature does
they
indeed
did it.
vote for the budget.
They put this budget in, and it was fine at the time, but now it's not, and we want to restore 7 positions in the county.
The one bright
office, 12 engineers, and a whole bunch of other people they
John, the one bright spot for the beleaguered taxpayers of Westchester County,
yes,
and we're about to become more beleaguered, as you'll hear later on in the program, the fact that the county executive-elect, George Latimer, has said that he's going to try as hard as he can to have no tax increase in his first year, or at least just a minimal tax increase. That's somewhat encouraging.
That's for the 2019 budget, not the 2019.
Well, remember now that Astorino characterized him as just another tax and spend Democrat.
Well,
you remember?
He was prescient.
He was saying Latimer's going to raise your taxes. All right?
Yes.
So he was saying, if you don't want your taxes raised, you got to vote for me. That's what he was saying, basically, during the campaign. So it's against that background that I think there will be some extra scrutiny on the financial side of the new administration.
Well, they'd better. They should look at spending, and this has always been the problem with the Democrats. They always like to fund the organizations that they like.
That's why Republicans came up with the phrase, "You're just a tax and spend Democrat."
Yes, perhaps the one thing that the Republicans have ever been right about, right?
And then, of course, the Democrats come up with the phrase, well, you're a Republican, so you're a big business Republican.
Yes, well, they are. Just how big that business is the topic of Trump the president. Peter, take it away.
Well, John, Donald Trump has chalked up a major accomplishment. He has proven Hitler to be absolutely correct. Hitler said, if you tell the same lie loud enough and long enough, people will be stupid enough to believe it. Well, Trump has been lying about the tax bill, now on Capitol Hill over and over again, saying it's a beautiful, wonderful, magnificent tax cut for the middle class and the coal miners and the blue-collar workers who formed most of the Trump voting base, denying that rich people like him and big corporations will make out like bandits. If Trump were Pinocchio, his nose would stretch across the Atlantic Ocean by now. In fact, it's Trump's base throughout the country, especially his voters in upstate New York, who are going to get killed by this tax bill. And the Republicans are especially targeting for tax hikes the people who live in 12 states which voted Democratic, where local taxes are higher than in places like the Republican South. Governor Cuomo had this reaction to the Republicans on Capitol Hill, telling New York, paraphrasing the Daily News from the 1970s, drop dead.
The federal government will tax the amount of money you pay in property taxes. Just think of that. They're going to tax the amount of money you pay in property taxes. This from the party that said they want to reduce taxation. It is a double tax. It has never happened before. Our tax code has been in place for over 100 years. I am most appalled that you would have Republican congresspeople who voted for it. And I talked to all of them, and they all had the same line, which was, well, you know, my political leaders are forcing me to vote for it. You don't work for your political leaders. You work for the people who elected you. And this was a betrayal of the people who elected them. So they're using New York as a piggy bank to finance the corporate tax cut. It's disgusting, it's reprehensible, it's a direct attack on this state. It's going to do real damage. This is very personal. When you fill out your taxes, you're going to be taxed on what you now pay on property tax. So you pay $10,000 in property taxes, you're going to be taxed on that $10,000. You pay $5,000 in income taxes, you're going to be taxed on that $5,000. It is ludicrous. Literally. Never before.
Now, as we are recording this program, on Capitol Hill this morning, Mitch McConnell, leader of the Senate, is trying to work out last-minute details to push through a vote on the Senate floor on the Senate version of the Trump tax bill, and then the Senate and the House members get together in committee, and a committee tries to reconcile the differences in the bill, and then they vote again on it. Now, federal taxes and the lack of action by the Trump administration on campaign promises to do something to fix up the nation's infrastructure and transportation systems received attention right here in White Plains this week. The Business Council of Westchester invited various experts to present their analyses of the Trump administration's first 11 months in office.
It was year one of Trump, a Business Council of Westchester event at the Rexon Center in White Plains on November 29th. Various speakers reviewed year one of the Trump administration. John Ravitz is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Business Council.
Conventional political wisdom is out the window when it comes to with this president. He does things, says things, acts in a way that we've never seen a president act. And yet the stock market is up. I've been in politics for 30 years. None of us have seen somebody act the way that he acts. And I think all of us are holding our breath in many cases to make sure that we're not hurting ourselves by the actions and the way that he handles this job of presidency. But again, we're in uncharted waters.
One of the speakers was Pace University law professor Thomas McDonnell, who characterized the administration's foreign policy as a return to the Wild West. He highlighted immigration.
Turning our back on these people who are so desperate to come here and to seek essential haven from what they've been going through is really turning back on American values and the American way. And this has hurt us.
Len Newman, a tax advisor with Greenberg Traurig of New York City and former president of the city's tax commission, discussed elements of the proposed federal tax changes.
Well, the impact, if they do in fact eliminate the state and local tax deduction, will put a lot of pressure on the city and the local communities, the surrounding counties' budgets. The real estate market may also take a hit. If the House bill passes, there will be no mortgage interest deduction for any home that's purchased that costs more than $500,000. The Senate has a $1 million, it leaves the $1 million threshold. But there are a lot of homeowners who will be severely affected, one, by the loss or the restriction of their property tax deductions against their federal income tax return, and two, whether the real estate market holds up if in fact people will not be able to afford the homes without the federal tax break.
Also among the speakers, Veronica Vanterpool, a member of the MTA Board of Directors, who pointed to the failure of the president to present a plan for infrastructure and transportation improvements right off the bat as promised, instead proposing drastic funding cuts.
Well, what Trump has said is that after there is tax reform legislation, he will then turn his attention back to infrastructure. That has, of course, been a huge disappointment from the American public, who has been waiting for details on infrastructure. Again, water, sewer infrastructure, school buildings, our roads and our bridges and our transit systems. Statewide, there are municipalities all over New York State that want to invest more in transit. The anticipation is, yes, every single division of the MTA system, so you're talking Metro North, Long Island Railroad, the subways, the buses, even the bridges and tunnels that are owned by Metro North, or I'm sorry, by MTA, are anticipated and expected to get some sort of cut. So MTA as an agency is unlikely to be spared some sort of reduction. What we're looking to see is how large and how sizable that reduction would be.
And of course, John, we know that if funding from government, various levels of government, doesn't come into the MTA,
guess who pays?
Guess who pays higher fares to use the MTA? Yeah. Guess who pays higher tolls to use bridges? Guess who gets hit most? According to a story just out this morning, a realtors group suggests that if the Trump tax plan passes with these elements in place that do hurt New Yorkers and actually the people in other so-called blue states, there could be a 15% drop in home values. There could be such a depression in the level of activity in the real estate market that we could see a return to the depression that we saw in 2008 when the housing market collapsed.
Quick, can I take a break? I have to call my realtor.
Yeah, something like that.
Right.
You know, I joke about this, but as a practical matter, if the Republicans continue this effort to really hurt states like New York, California, etc.,
another civil war,
you're going to see, I think, people fleeing those states to go to
lower
Florida.
Taxes. Yes, no doubt, and we can flip Florida.
Now,
right, exactly.
This, of course, would have a detrimental effect on the Republican Party because Florida, a red state, will suddenly become a blue state because all the Democrats are being forced to move there.
Well, that is whimsy at this point.
And it may be whimsy. It may be a failed attempt at political humor.
Well, unfortunately, it's gallows humor.
As a practical matter, as long as we've gone there, as far as Florida goes, about 100,000 people from Puerto Rico so far have fled to Florida. And the mayor of San Juan, in an interview this past week, said these people will vote in Florida's elections.
Yes, because they're citizens.
Anyway,
how about that? But
more significant,
yes,
there is a blockbuster story unfolding right now as we're recording this. Mike Flynn, the general, the former chief White House security advisor to President Trump, the man who was deeply involved with Trump throughout the campaign, the man who spoke with Trump, appeared with him at campaign rallies, the man who led the lock her up chants during Trump campaign rallies, is in federal court pleading guilty to a felony to lying to the FBI in the Russia investigation. Now, when people do this, enter a guilty plea during an investigation before an indictment has been announced, it usually means that they have flipped and they have thrown some higher-ups who the investigation is looking at under the bus. We wonder what higher-ups Flynn could have thrown under the bus, if any. When President Trump lit the nation's Christmas tree at the White House this week, his speech seemed to be drafted to establish Christianity as the state religion. Now, state religions, as we know, are unconstitutional in this country. The holiday season is not reserved just for Christmas, although you'd never know it from Trump's speech. The right-wing, especially fundamentalist Christians, have been campaigning to put an end to people saying happy holidays. And Trump said he had been looking forward all year to being able to wish everyone Merry Christmas at the tree lighting. No mention of Passover from Trump, or Kwanzaa, or anything else, and certainly no mention of atheism. The New York Times reports that several leaders in the Senate have now admitted that Trump pressured them to end the investigation into ties with Russia and the Russian influence in the election. If true, that could very well be obstruction of justice. You don't want to be caught obstructing justice. Remember what happened to Richard Nixon when he was caught.
Yes.
Special counsel Robert Mueller will be interviewing Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner in connection with the Russia investigation. President Trump deserves an award. I'll bet you never thought I would say that, John. President Trump deserves an award, at least a full page in the Guinness Book of World Records, for a major, major accomplishment. He has told what is probably the biggest lie ever told by any human being. He went to Springfield, Missouri this week, John, to campaign for his tax plan. And in his speech, he said the tax bill will do nothing for him. He said he doesn't benefit at all. He told the crowd he'll get nothing, not one dime in tax savings. And they actually bought the lie and cheered him. In fact, it is estimated that the tax bill that they're considering right now on Capitol Hill will go down in history as dropping the Trump personal tax bill by anywhere from $30 million to $100 million a year. And if this tax bill goes through, as we think it might, his family will put about $1 billion in their pockets. And he tells the crowd, this will do nothing for me.
He's giving himself a pay raise.
Rex Tillerson is on the way out as Secretary of State after starting to fulfill the Steve Bannon-Donald Trump plan to wreck the State Department. He apparently did a turnaround, which eventually led to him calling Trump a moron. Their relationship has reportedly been growing colder and colder, and if Tillerson doesn't resign pretty soon, likely no later than the end of January, it's believed Trump is going to fire him. The reports say the replacement will be CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Attorney General Jeff Sessions refused to answer an important question under oath at a House committee closed-door hearing. He was asked if President Trump asked him, Sessions, to interfere with the Muller investigation of Trump and his cohorts. Sessions refused to answer, which itself may tell us all we need to know. Had enough, John?
Well, there's more every week. You know, it's a feature just has legs, you know, has legs. Meanwhile, speaking of legs, there is a movement about to bring more improvements in mass transit. And here's a picture of the cover of the Westchester Business Journal, a copy of which is right here. And it's all about a report that tells municipalities to build housing at train stations.
Yeah, yes, actually, this ties in. If you look at the developments, what's happening in White Plains, the study that was done of the train station area, you look at the interest in Yonkers, look at the interest in New Rochelle, in developing around the train stations, you will see that is now being accepted in the mainstream of real estate development. That this is the future. The future is attract the millennials. The future is put your housing near the train station so people will have easy commutation. The development that's going on in Westchester City, such as White Plains, received a good deal of attention recently when members of the Westchester County Association gathered at an event where Scott Reckler, head of RXR Realty, was the keynote speaker. Now, RXR has about $17.8 billion worth of properties, approximately 23.7 million square feet of operating commercial space, about 6,000 residential units. It's the principal developer in downtown, and RXR likes what it sees in downtown White Plains. The Westchester County Association held its fall leadership dinner November 16th at the Westchester Marriott in Tarrytown. The keynote speaker was Scott Reckler, Chairman and CEO of RXR Realty.
We're very focused on downtown redevelopments, and as the master developer of New Rochelle, we're just real life going up right now, 28 stories in our first project there. We're starting to top out our first building in Yonkers, and we're going to continue to invest in those markets and help revitalize those downtowns. You know, we're more interested in the suburban downtowns, and so the traditional suburban office parks, like in Tarrytown where we are now, we used to own this park and we sold it. So we've been divesting ourselves from the suburban office parks and more reinvesting in the suburban downtowns. I think that there's a recognition by the local cities like White Plains, like New Rochelle, like Yonkers, that there could be a win-win relationship, and that if they work and have a good plan in place and they work with developers on how you can build out the city to be attractive to 21st century users and millennials and young professionals and aging professionals, that they'll create more long-term vitality.
Now, John, as we speak, just walking distance of the White Plains train station, there's a new building in the process of opening and welcoming its first tenants.
That's the Continuum, and that was Mayor Roach with the
in the upper right.
In the upper right, that was taken on a tour of the Continuum, and that got its first tenants in mid-November, and that is now on the market. It'll be the first signal as to whether this millennial movement market is really real.
Now, this was just yesterday. We did note that although it's not a Louis Capelli building, Capelli's construction company put this up and talk
in
about
record time.
It seemed like record time.
No, he builds things. He builds things.
Right.
He doesn't sit around waiting for financing. He builds things.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, there obviously still is finishing work to be done over there.
Yeah.
And then we have the question of what is going to happen on the rest of that site. Will indeed they go ahead with the next building to go into that
who knows?
site?
If I'm RXR, I put in a blow-away proposal for the train station. You know, that is waiting to be done. They have 3 proposals, which the Common Council hasn't heard anything about, from my understanding, but we'd like to see who those proposals are from.
Well, yeah, well, originally Mayor Roach had said that they got 9 responses to their request for interest. Now,
okay, so he has 9. Maybe they weeded it down to 3. Who knows?
Yeah, eventually you weed it down to 1 proposal.
Yes.
You know that they
who you wanted all along.
Sometimes
That's usually what works.
Yeah,
now, looking
not
around
always,
town,
not always.
looking around town, they're going to have 5,000 apartments, and one of these things is the White Plains Mall rebuild. Next slide. The Pavilion rebuild, 700 apartments. Next slide. The Esplanade has got all the scaffolding off it, and they're going to be putting in tenants at market rate. Next slide. The DeKalb apartments are rising above the ground down on Maple Avenue. Next slide. That is the apartments to rise on Mamaroneck and East Post Road, another one of those mall projects that is on track. Next slide. There's the apartments to rise opposite the Westchester. Next. And there's the Grid property still fallow. Townhouses are supposed to go there. We need some information on that.
Now that's out near the Scarsdale border.
That's
where
right.
Shoals,
and finally, you've got this apartment at the former AT&T building. It's being renovated. Now the problem is you're going to have 5,000 people. You need more train cars to handle that much of a crowd in the rush hours.
Well, if indeed Metro North gets budget cuts because of what happens in Washington, are they going to be able to keep up with the demand for their services?
Well, that's a real problem, but we have a problem. We're out of time. Fully packed show. John Bailey, Peter Katz. Good night for White Plains Week.
This has been White Plains Week. News and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.